Why would a lone cowboy claim a woman in chains, only to never touch her once she was his? The metal cuff snaps shut around her wrist, the sound sharp against the heat-soaked street. Dust sticks to her lips as the sheriff pulls her forward, boots scraping wood behind her. Then, another hand clamps down, firm, unhurried. "She belongs to me," the cowboy says, and the whole town goes still. But his eyes never once meet hers. What kind of man makes that claim, and then steps away? "Stay with me. You're going to want to see where this goes." The sun sat high over Silver Ridge, burning the dust into the street until the whole town looked like it had been baked and left to crack. Evelyn Brooks stood on the wooden step outside Miller's General Store, her hand still resting on the doorframe. A sack of flour lay at her feet, split open, pale powder spilling into the dirt like something wasted. Sheriff Dalton had her wrist, not tight enough to bruise, just enough to show everyone who was in charge. "You can explain it proper at the office," he said, voice calm, like this was nothing more than a chore. Evelyn didn't pull back. Her shoulders stayed straight. Her chin didn't drop. "I paid for it," she said. Dalton didn't look at her. He glanced instead at the shopkeeper, who stood just inside the doorway, wiping his hands on a rag he didn't need. "You see her pay?" The man hesitated. His eyes flicked once toward Evelyn, then away. "No, sir. That was enough." The sheriff reached for the iron cuff hanging from his belt. Around them, boots shifted. Someone cleared their throat. A woman across the street stopped mid-step, then kept walking as if she hadn't seen a thing. Evelyn's fingers curled once, slow, then stilled. The metal snapped shut around her wrist. The sound carried farther than it should have. Dalton turned her toward the street. "Come on now." She moved because standing still would have made it worse. The flour sack dragged a line behind her before someone nudged it aside with a boot. They didn't speak to her. They didn't need to. The town had already decided. They made it halfway down the street when a horse stepped into the road. Not fast, not loud, just there. Dalton slowed. The reins of the horse hung loose in the rider's hand. Dust clung to the man's coat, to the brim of his hat, to the leather at his shoulders, like he'd been riding a long while without stopping. He didn't look at the sheriff first. He looked at Evelyn. Just once. Long enough to take in the cuff, the set of her shoulders, the way she didn't bow her head. Then he swung down from the saddle. Boots hit the dirt with a dull thud. "Afternoon," Dalton said, already annoyed. "Best keep moving." The man didn't. He stepped closer, slow, until the space between them narrowed to something tight and uncomfortable. Dalton's grip tightened slightly on Evelyn's wrist. "That woman's under arrest." A pause. Wind dragged a thin sheet of dust across the street, whispering against the boards. Then the man reached out. Not toward Evelyn, toward Dalton. His hand closed around the sheriff's wrist. Firm, not sudden, just certain. Dalton blinked, more surprised than angry. "You planning to let go?" he said. "Low, or make this a bigger problem?" The man's voice came steady. "She belongs to me." It didn't sound loud, but it carried. Every head on the street turned. Evelyn felt it before she reacted. The shift in the air, the weight of every eye pressing in. She jerked her arm, sharp. "I don't belong to—" Dalton cut her off with a look, but it wasn't at her. It was at the man holding his wrist. "You got proof of that?" The man released him, slowly. Reaching into his coat, he pulled out a folded paper. Not new, edges worn, like it had been handled more than once. Dalton took it, scanned it quick. His jaw tightened. Behind them, someone muttered. Another voice hushed it down. Dalton looked back up, not as certain now. "You vouching for her, Turner?" Wade Turner didn't answer right away. He glanced at Evelyn again. Not soft, not hard, just measuring something he hadn't decided on. Then he nodded once. Dalton exhaled through his nose, handcuffs still in place, but his grip eased. "She runs," he said. "It's on you." "She won't," Wade replied. Evelyn turned her head toward him, sharp. "You don't know that." He didn't look at her. Dalton unlocked the cuff. The metal clicked open, leaving a pale mark around her wrist where the skin had been pressed. He handed the iron back to his belt. "This ain't finished," he said. "You hear me, Miss Brooks?" She didn't answer. Didn't need to. The street began to move again, not all at once, slowly, like nothing had happened. But the looks stayed. They followed her as she bent to pick up what was left of the flour sack. It wasn't worth carrying. She let it drop. Wade had already turned back to his horse. He didn't offer his hand, just waited. Evelyn stood there a moment longer than she needed to. Then she walked past him, climbed into the wagon without asking. Wood creaked under her weight. The seat was worn smooth. The leather reins cracked where they'd been repaired more than once. Wade stepped up beside her, took the reins, and flicked them once. The horse moved. No one waved goodbye. The town watched them leave in silence, dust rising behind the wheels like a curtain closing. They rode out past the last row of buildings, past the water trough, past the stretch where the road split and thinned into open land. Only then did Evelyn speak. "You don't get to say that." Wade kept his eyes on the road. "Say what?" She turned toward him, the mark on her wrist catching the light. "That I belong to you." The wagon rolled over a patch of uneven ground. The boards rattled. Wade didn't answer right away. Wind moved through the dry grass on either side of the road. After a while, he said, "It got you out of a cell." Evelyn let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "And into what?" He adjusted the reins. "Somewhere they can't take you from." She watched him for a long second. He didn't look back. The road stretched ahead, pale and empty, cutting through land that didn't promise much of anything. Evelyn turned forward again. Her hand rested lightly against the edge of the seat. The mark from the cuff hadn't faded yet. Neither had the weight of every eye in that town. But behind them, Silver Ridge had already shrunk to a blur, and whatever waited ahead, it wasn't finished with either of them. The road narrowed after the last mile marker, turning from packed dirt into something softer, less traveled. The wagon wheels sank just enough to slow the horse, the rhythm changing to a quieter, heavier roll. Evelyn didn't ask how far. Wade didn't offer. By the time the sun dipped lower, stretching shadows long across the dry grass, the outline of the ranch came into view. It sat alone, pushed back from the road like it had something to hide. The main house was bigger than she expected, but it carried a stillness that didn't feel lived in. Off to the side, the remains of a burned structure stood like a memory no one had cleared away. Blackened beams, a half-fallen wall, ash that had settled into the ground and never left. Wade pulled the wagon to a stop near the porch. The horse huffed once, shaking its head. "That's it," he said. Evelyn stepped down before he would offer anything. Her boots hit the ground with a dull sound, dust rising around the hem of her dress. She looked at the house, then at the burned remains. "You live here alone?" Wade looped the reins over the post. "Yes." No explanation followed. He walked past her, up the steps, and pushed the front door open. It creaked, slow and unbothered, like it had done the same thing 1,000 times. Inside, the air felt cooler, not fresh, just still. He pointed down the short hallway, room on the east side, that was all. Evelyn stood there a moment, waiting for more. Something about rules or expectations. Nothing came. Wade turned back toward the door, already rolling his sleeves down. "I'll be outside." She frowned slightly. Outside? He didn't answer, just stepped out and let the door fall back into place behind him. The sound echoed through the house longer than it should have. Evelyn moved slowly down the hallway. The floorboards shifted under her weight, not loose, just old. The room he'd pointed to had a narrow bed, a wooden chair, and a small washbasin by the window. A folded quilt sat at the foot of the bed, worn thin at the edges but clean. She set her hands on the back of the chair, pressing lightly, testing its steadiness. Everything here had been used. Nothing here had been kept for comfort. She crossed to the window and pushed it open. The air that came in carried the smell of dry grass and something faint beneath it. Smoke, maybe. Old and settled. Out on the porch, Wade sat in a straight-backed chair. One boot crossed over the other, hat tilted low. A tin cup rested in his hand, untouched. He didn't look toward the window. Evelyn let the curtain fall back into place. That night came quickly. The light faded from gold to gray, then to something deeper that settled into the corners of the house. She lit the small lamp by the bed, the flame catching slow before steadying. Somewhere outside, wood creaked. Footsteps crossed the porch, not heavy, not hurried. She sat on the edge of the bed, listening. The steps came close to the door, paused, then moved away again. The handle never turned. Evelyn exhaled slowly, her fingers brushing over the mark still faint on her wrist. By morning, the sky had gone pale and wide again. She found the kitchen by following the smell of coffee. A pot sat on the stove, still warm, steam just beginning to fade. Beside it, a second cup had been set out. Not close, not far either. She poured for herself, sat at the table. The chair across from her remained empty. Outside, she could hear him working. The steady knock of something against wood. A pause. Then again. She didn't go to the door. Didn't call out. After a while, the sound stopped. Instead came the slow crunch of wheels over gravel. Evelyn stepped out onto the porch. A wagon approached, smaller than Wade's, driven by an older woman with her gray hair pinned tight at the back of her head. She pulled up near the fence and climbed down without asking. "Morning," the woman said, brushing her hands on her apron. Evelyn nodded. "Morning." The woman studied her for a second. "Not unkind. Just careful. You must be the one he brought back." Evelyn didn't answer that. The woman gave a small hum like she hadn't expected one. "Name's Hargrove," she said. "I come by with supplies. Sometimes food, if he forgets to eat proper." She lifted a basket from the wagon and carried it up the steps. Inside, she moved like she knew the place. Set things down, rearranged what needed rearranging. Evelyn leaned against the doorway, watching. "You staying?" Mrs. Hargrove asked, not looking at her. "For now." Another hum. "Well," the older woman said, lowering her voice just enough, "folk in town will have their say either way." Evelyn met her eyes. They already did. Mrs. Hargrove gave a faint nod. "Yes," she said. "They do that." She wiped her hands again and turned toward the door. "Just so you know," she added, pausing at the threshold, "that man out there, he don't take what ain't his." Evelyn's gaze shifted toward the porch. Wade stood near the fence now, back turned, hands resting on the top rail. Still, like he'd been there the whole time. Mrs. Hargrove stepped past her. "People say a lot," she went on. "Fire makes stories grow fast." Then she climbed back onto her wagon and left without another word. The dust settled slowly behind her wheels. Evelyn stayed where she was, watching the man by the fence. He hadn't come inside once, hadn't asked her a single question, hadn't crossed the space between them. But the door, it had never been locked. That was the first thing Evelyn noticed. The second was how little noise the place made when he was inside it. Days settled into a rhythm that didn't ask for agreement. Wade was gone before the sun cleared the ridge most mornings. She'd hear the horse before she saw him, hooves soft against dirt, then fading. He never said where he went. He never said when he'd be back. But things changed, quiet as breath. On the third morning, she found the loose board on the porch step had been fixed. The nail heads sat clean and flush, hammered in straight. She hadn't heard him do it. By afternoon, the leak in the kitchen roof had been patched. A square of new wood stood out pale against the darker planks. No note, no mention, just done. Evelyn ran her fingers along the edge of it once, then pulled her hand back like she wasn't meant to leave a mark. Inside, she kept busy. The cupboard had more in it than she expected. Flour in a tin with a dented lid. A small sack of beans tied tight with twine. Coffee wrapped in paper, folded neat like someone who didn't waste. She made what she could from it. A pot simmered low one evening, steam curling slow into the air. She set a second plate on the table without thinking. Then she looked at it. Stood there longer than she meant to. When the door creaked open behind her, she didn't turn. Wade stepped in, boots quiet against the floor. He stopped when he saw the table. 2 plates, 2 cups. Evelyn moved first, reaching for the extra plate. "You can eat," she said, not looking at him. "Food don't spoil faster with company." A pause, then his voice low. "I eat outside." She nodded once like she expected it. Didn't argue. He stepped back out, closing the door behind him. The second plate stayed on the table a while longer before she cleared it. That night, the wind picked up. It pressed against the walls, found its way through the seams in the wood. The house breathed with it. Soft creaks, low murmurs. Evelyn lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Then she heard it. A sound from the back of the house. Not the wind. Something lighter. A shift. She sat up slowly, bare feet finding the floor. The lamp stayed unlit. She moved down the hallway, each step placed careful between the boards she'd learned would groan. The back door stood open just enough for the wind to slip through. Beyond it, the yard stretched out under thin moonlight. And there, near the burned structure, Wade. He stood with his back to the house, hands resting at his sides, not working, not moving, just standing there. Evelyn stepped out onto the porch. The wood was cold under her feet. "You go there every night?" she asked. He didn't turn right away. The wind lifted the edge of his coat. "Yes." No more. She looked past him, toward the blackened beams, the shape of what used to be something whole. What happened? A longer pause this time. Then, it burned. She almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny, because it wasn't enough. "You don't say." He turned then, just enough for the moonlight to catch part of his face. Not all of it. The rest stayed in shadow. "It's what people say about it that matters more," he added. Evelyn held his gaze. "And what do you say?" He looked back at the structure. "I say it's done." That was it. He turned away again, like the conversation had reached its end without either of them deciding it had. Evelyn stayed on the porch a moment longer. Then she stepped down into the yard, walked past him without asking. The ground near the burned building felt different, harder, like the heat had settled into it and never quite left. She crouched near the edge where the boards met dirt. Something caught her eye. A piece of cloth, half buried. She pulled it free. It had once been light-colored, maybe a shirt. Now it was stained dark in places, the fabric stiff where it had dried. Not recent, but not forgotten either. Evelyn stood, turning it in her hands. Behind her, Wade's voice came. "Don't. Not sharp. Just certain." She didn't drop it. Didn't move closer either. Why? He didn't answer right away. The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of old ash between them. It don't belong to you, he said. Evelyn looked down at the cloth, then back at him. Neither does a lot of things I've been handed lately. For a second, something in his expression shifted. Small. Gone before she could name it. Then he stepped forward. Not close enough to take it. Just close enough to be there. Leave it, he said, quieter now. Evelyn held it one more second. Then she set it back where she found it. Not because he told her to, because something about the way he stood there made it feel like crossing a line she didn't understand yet. She brushed her hands together, wiping off dust that didn't quite come clean. When she turned to go back, he was already stepping away. Back toward the fence, back toward the distance he kept between them. Evelyn climbed the porch steps slowly. At the door, she paused, looked back once. He stood in the same place again. Still, watching something she couldn't see. Inside, the lamp still burned low on the table. 2 cups sat there, one untouched. She didn't clear it this time. By morning, the coffee had gone cold in the cup Wade never used. Evelyn poured it out into the dirt just beyond the porch. The dark liquid sank fast, leaving no mark behind. She stood there a moment longer than needed, the empty cup still in her hand, then set it back on the table where it had been. Nothing moved in the house. Outside, the wind had dropped, the kind of stillness that made every small sound carry farther than it should. By noon, a rider came, young, thin, hat pulled low, like he didn't want to be seen more than he had to. He slowed at the gate but didn't step off his horse. "Message for Turner," he called. Evelyn walked out to meet him. The boards creaked under her weight. "He's not here." The boy hesitated, then held out the envelope anyway. Sealed in dark red wax. No name on the front. Just a mark pressed deep into it. "You can give it," he said quickly. "I was told not to wait." He turned his horse before she could ask anything else. Dust lifted behind him as he rode off, faster than he'd arrived. Evelyn stood there, the envelope resting in her palm. It felt heavier than paper should. Inside, the house stayed quiet. She didn't open it right away. Set it on the table. Walked past it. Came back. The wax caught the light. Dark. Clean. Unbroken. She slid a knife under the edge. The seal cracked. Inside was a single sheet. Folded once. Her eyes moved across the lines. $2,000. 3 days. Or the truth about the fire would be spoken out loud, in front of the whole town. No signature. But it didn't need one. Evelyn read it again. Slower, then folded it back the way she found it. When the door opened near dusk, she didn't turn. Wade stepped inside, dust clinging to his boots, shoulders set like he'd carried something all day that hadn't let go. He stopped when he saw the envelope. He didn't ask how it got there. Just picked it up, read it once. Then again. The room held still. Evelyn watched him from across the table. "You expecting that?" she asked. He didn't look up, no. But he didn't sound surprised either. He folded the paper carefully. Set it down flat. Didn't tear it. Didn't hide it. Just left it there between them. "They're asking for money," she said. "I see that. And if you don't pay?" He leaned back slightly, the chair giving a soft creak under his weight. "They'll talk." Evelyn studied him. "You care what they say?" A pause. Then, "No." The answer came too easy. She leaned forward, resting her hand near the edge of the table. "They're not just talking about you." That made him look up. Just for a second. then away again. They're counting on that, he said. Evelyn didn't blink. On what? On you hearing it. The words settled heavier than the paper between them. She pushed the envelope slightly toward him. So what do you do? Wade stood, walked to the door, opened it halfway before answering. Nothing. The evening air slipped inside, cooler now, carrying the smell of dry grass and something faint beneath it. You let them say it? She asked. He stepped onto the porch. They've been saying it for years. Evelyn followed him out. The sky had turned low and dim, clouds stretching thin across it like something worn. And you never stopped it. He rested his hands on the railing. I never found a way that made it quieter. She looked at him, really looked this time, at the line of his jaw, the way his shoulders held steady even when everything else didn't. You think silence makes it go away? No, he said. It just makes it easier to live with. Evelyn let that sit, then shook her head once. That's not the same thing. He didn't argue, didn't agree either. They stood there until the light dropped lower, until the land stretched out in front of them in long, quiet lines. Finally, Evelyn turned back inside. She picked up the envelope again. This time, she didn't set it down. Instead, she reached for a blank sheet from the drawer near the stove, found a pen, dipped it slow. Wade watched from the doorway. Didn't step in. What are you doing? He asked. She didn't look up, inviting them. To what? Evelyn paused just long enough for the ink to settle, then wrote the next line. To say it out loud. The pen moved steady across the page. No hesitation, no second thought. Wade's hand tightened slightly against the doorframe. You don't know what you're opening. Evelyn finished the last line. Set the pen down, folded the paper once. I know what happens if I don't. She turned then, met his eyes, for the first time without stepping back. 3 days, she said. You already gave them that much. The wind shifted again, not stronger, just different. Carrying something that hadn't been there before. Wade held her gaze a second longer, then nodded once. Not agreement, not refusal, just acceptance of something already in motion. Evelyn sealed the letter, not with wax, just a fold. It didn't need more than that. By morning, the message would be on its way back to town. And this time, the truth wouldn't be waiting to be whispered. The morning came slow, like the land itself wasn't sure it wanted to wake. Evelyn had been up before first light. The coffee was already on, the kettle ticking soft against the stove. Outside, the air carried that thin chill that never stayed long once the sun climbed. She tied the last ribbon to the gatepost. White cloth, clean, easy to see from the road. Wade stood by the barn, hammer in hand, driving nails into a loose plank that didn't need fixing twice. Each strike landed harder than the last, like he was trying to measure something he couldn't name. Neither of them spoke. By noon, the first wagon came. Then another. Dust rose in slow curls along the road as Silver Ridge made its way out to Cedar Run Ranch. Folks came quiet. Not laughing. Not talking much. Just looking. Evelyn stood on the porch, hands resting light against the railing. Her dress was plain, blue. Nothing new about it. But it sat different on her now. Wade stayed behind her. Not close, not far. Sheriff Dalton arrived near the middle of it, boots heavy on the ground as he stepped down. His eyes moved across the yard, counting faces, measuring what this might turn into. Mr. Whitaker came last. He didn't hurry. Took his time stepping out of his carriage, brushing dust from his coat like it didn't belong there. His gaze found Wade first, then Evelyn. A faint smile touched his mouth. Not friendly, just certain. The The table had been set in the yard. Not for eating, just space. Evelyn walked down from the porch when the crowd settled. She didn't raise her voice. Didn't need to. "You all came," she said. "That's enough." A murmur moved through the group. Someone shifted. A boot scraped against dirt. She placed the two papers on the table. One unfolded. One still sealed at the edge where the wax had broken. "This one," she said, resting her fingers lightly on it, "came to this house yesterday." She didn't look at Wade. Didn't need to. $2,000. Or a story gets told in church come Sunday. The words hung there. Sheriff Dalton crossed his arms. "Sounds like trouble you brought on yourself," he said. Evelyn turned her head slightly. Met his eyes just long enough. Maybe. Then she moved her hand to the second paper. This one didn't come from here. She opened it. Flattened it against the wood. I had it looked at. That stirred something. Whitaker's smile shifted. Just a fraction. "Looked at by who?" he asked, voice smooth. Evelyn nodded toward the edge of the crowd. A boy stepped forward, hat in his hands, shoulders tight. "Tommy Reed. I carry letters," he said, voice catching once before steadying. "Been doing it near 2 years." He swallowed. "I seen this handwriting before." Whitaker's gaze hardened. "Careful now," he said. Tommy didn't look at him. "Day before yesterday," he went on, "I saw Mr. Whitaker hand over an envelope. Same paper. Same mark in the wax all." The yard went quiet. Not the kind of quiet that listens. The kind that waits. Evelyn didn't move. "Same hand wrote both," she said. "Only difference is one asks for money and the other pretends it never did." Sheriff Dalton shifted his weight. "That don't prove anything," he said, but his voice had lost something. Evelyn looked at Whitaker. "You want to tell it?" she asked. He held her gaze. For a moment, it looked like he might laugh it off. Then his eyes flicked, just once, toward Dalton. That was enough. Wade stepped forward then. Not fast, not loud, just there. "And the fire?" he said. Whitaker's jaw tightened. "What about it?" "You said I lit it." A pause. "You said a lot of things," Wade went on. "Figured today might be a good day to say where you got them." Whitaker opened his mouth, closed it. Dalton shifted again. Not stepping in this time. The crowd leaned closer without meaning to. Whitaker let out a breath that wasn't quite steady. "Stories don't come from nowhere," he said. "No," Evelyn replied. "They come from someone." Another silence. Longer now. Then, "I didn't say you said it," Whitaker muttered. Not loud, but enough. The words landed. And once they did, they couldn't be pulled back. The murmur spread. Not loud, not angry, just different. Wade didn't smile, didn't move closer. He just stood there, like he'd been standing that way for years, letting the weight fall where it belonged. One by one, people started stepping back, not apologizing, not speaking, just leaving. Dalton was among the first. Whitaker followed not long after, slower this time. The yard emptied until it was just dust again, and quiet. Evelyn stood by the table, hands resting at her sides. Wade turned away first, walked back toward the porch like nothing had happened, like everything had. That night, he took his usual place outside. Same chair, same distance. Evelyn stepped out a while later, 2 cups in her hands. She set one beside him. Didn't sit right away. He glanced at it, then at her. "You didn't have to do that," he said. She shrugged once. "Didn't do it for you." He almost smiled. Almost. She sat down then, not close enough to touch, close enough that the space between them didn't feel like a wall anymore. They didn't talk, didn't need to. The wind moved softer now, the land stretching quiet in every direction. After a while, he said, "You still need a place to stay?" Evelyn looked out at the dark fields, at the shape of the barn, at the house that had never closed its doors. She didn't answer right away, just rested her hand against the edge of the chair. Then, slow, she stayed, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because something in that quiet place had begun to feel like truth. If you had been standing there that evening, dust still clinging to your boots, the weight of other people's judgment still sitting heavy on your shoulders, you might have done the same. You might have looked at a man who never asked you to stay, never tried to hold you in place, and realized that was the first time anyone ever gave you a real choice. Out on that porch, there were no grand promises, no words dressed up to sound like love, just two people, learning how to sit in the same silence without fear. And maybe that's where it starts. Not with fire or storms or the things that break us, but with someone who doesn't turn away when the dust settles. Somewhere between the distance he kept and the step she finally took toward him, something steady took root. Not loud, not fragile, just real enough to last. If this story left something with you, maybe a memory or a quiet kind of hope, tell me where you're watching from. I always wonder how far these stories travel. And if you feel like staying a little longer, there are more stories waiting just beyond this one. Stories about people who carry too much and the unexpected ways they find their way back. I'll see you there.